Well, a little earlier, in his only interview today, I spoke to the Shadow Chancellor, Ed Balls, about his announcement, and I asked him if he could guarantee that only the top 1% of earners would pay more tax under Labour.
Well, what I'm not doing, obviously, is trying to write a budget 15 months before a general election. I said in my speech that you can't do that in opposition when you don't know the state of the economy and the public finances. And so I'm not going to do that. But what I've said very clearly today is that we will get the deficit down. We'll balance the current budget in the next Parliament sooner rather than later, as soon as we can. But to do that in a fair way, we won't go ahead. We will restore, instead, the 50p rate for people earning over £150,000. I think that for people on middle and low incomes, they're paying a lot more tax. People feel really under pressure. But people at the top have had a massive tax cut. And I don't think that's fair. So that is what I'm saying today we're going to restore. It actually reflects a sort of a wider point here, which is that we have got to show, having lost the election 3.5 years ago, that we can be trusted and credible to change Britain.
How much do you believe the 50p rate will raise? Because the government argues it was only raising about £1 billion. It's not going to raise very much anyway.
Well, I think if a Chancellor tells you £1 billion is not very much, it sounds like he's not doing his job very well. That seems like a rather lot of money to me. What I think we know today is that Conservative Treasury ministers cannot tell us it won't raise revenue because they know it will. Even on their assumptions, which were very political, it raised revenue. What we now know from the experience of the 50p rate over 3 years is it raised £10 billion more over those 3 years than the government thought when they decided to go ahead with the cut in 2012.
When you say it's raised 3 times more, where are those figures from and have they been approved or rubber-stamped by the OBR?
Oh, those are government figures. They're not
so
our figures.
HMRC
the
figures.
HMRC figures show that in the 3 years when the 50p was operational, the actual money which came in from people earning over £150,000 in income tax was £10 billion more over 3 years than the HMRC thought when they did their report on the top rate tax cut in 2012. So when it was there, it raised a lot more money, and it will raise money when we restore it.
You're already being seen, though, as an anti-business party by some top businessmen. The CBI are sending out warnings all the time at the moment. This is just going to make it worse, isn't it?
Well, look,
for the rich 1%.
Look, it is anti-business as usual. Absolutely. Anti-business as usual, because we can't carry on the way we've been. But is it an anti-business agenda? Anybody listening to my speech today would hear me say we need to be open and international, outward-facing, back wealth creation and entrepreneurs. We need more profits from companies to invest. Of course, we need to be pro-business, but it's got to be long-term. We need more competition. We need more long-term investment. We need firms who work to upskill their workforces. That is a big transformatory change. It's not anti-business. And to be honest, I don't think if the test of whether you're pro-business is whether you raise taxes for people on middle and lower incomes, but cut them only for the richest people, I think that's a very, very silly test. I think business people know that if we're going to have a pro-business, open, investing Britain for the long term, in Europe as well, we've got to show there's real change, and we're the people setting that out.
But you don't have any FTSE leaders backing Labour at the moment, do you? Well, I mean, do any of them think this is a good idea?
I think, to be honest, at this stage, when there's still a year to go before an election, you don't really have FTSE leaders coming out and saying they're going to be Labour or Conservative.
Yeah, but you've got the CBI coming out warning that Labour is sounding anti-business. Well, you've got business leaders saying, we think you're sounding anti-business. That's the problem. Well, and or maybe it isn't. I mean, do you just not care?
No, look, I've spoken to the CBI about what we've announced today. They understand that we are setting out pro-business, long-term policies to change our economy. They understand we're making tough decisions to get the budget surplus down to zero, to surplus, to get the current budget into surplus and to get the national debt falling, and that we're saying Labour will do it in a fairer way. Now, they agree on the first two. Of course, senior business leaders would rather that we weren't saying we'll have a 50p top rate of tax. I think privately people understand.
When you brought in the 50p rate, it was a temporary measure. It was, we've got to sort out the deficit. You're now saying something different, aren't you?
No.
That this is something that you think should stay for the whole Parliament and possibly beyond, presumably.
Look,
You're no longer a tax-cutting party for the rich, is what I mean.
No, I'm not sure whether Labour has ever been, in its first principle, a tax-cutting party for the rich, but we'd quite like to be a tax-cutting party for all. And we are saying, as Labour, to get the deficit down in a fair way, we will keep the top rate tax at 50% in the next Parliament. It's to get the deficit down. It's not a matter of principle. It's not because we want to hit the rich.
But then you could say, well, once the deficit's gone, we'll scrap it. You're not saying that, are you?
No, because I'm saying that for the next Parliament, when we're getting the deficit down, we're going to have the top rate of tax. I'm not saying, though, it's a matter of principle. I'd rather tax rates were lower rather than higher. I'm not going to squeeze the rich for the sake of it. This is because we need, in a fair way, to raise revenue, to get the deficit down, and people on middle and low incomes have been hit hard. They're worse off, despite David Cameron's ridiculous claims, they're worse off. But the people at the top have seen a big tax cut, and that's not fair.
Today, you're also committing to legislate for a balanced budget, no deficits in the future. That's an admission that people don't believe you if you just say it, isn't it? Well, you need law to convince people that you are trustworthy.
I think that, that over the last 10 years, after the global financial crisis, when the deficit was big and people wanted to know it was going to come down, the last Labour government and the current coalition government have both said they are going to legislate and have legislated, and we're going to legislate in the next Parliament. So I don't think it's an issue.
But that is about trust in politicians, isn't it? You need to legislate because nobody out there believes you.
No, I think that's right. People want to know this is really going to happen. That
but that's terrible, isn't it? That's your fault from your period in power that nobody believes you when you just say we want to get rid of the deficit. Well, you need to pass a law to actually persuade them.
I've said over the last 6 months that we will ask the independent Office of Budget Responsibility to audit our tax and spending plans and show that the costings are right, to help us restore trust in politicians to make fiscal decisions.
You are now promising to behave in a way that you didn't behave when you were in power. You're saying we will not run a deficit. You did run a deficit when you were in power, even though the economy was growing. So that is an admission that you were wrong, isn't it?
Well, look,
to spend that much.
The last government to have a current surplus on the budget was the last Labour government in 2001. We inherited a deficit, we turned it into a surplus, and we had the national debt falling. Then there was a global financial crisis. I'm saying to you that we're going to get the deficit down, we're going to finish the job the Tories haven't done. That's not an admission that we spent too much in government. We didn't spend everything right and we got some things wrong. But actually, I'm rather proud of the investments we made in the National Health Service and in our schools.
There is also a personal aspect to this, which is that you're asking people to trust you on the economy and trust that when you say you and Ed Miliband are getting on well and all the rest of it, that's true. And yet we still have had these briefings from Ed Miliband's office, not briefings, but the leaked emails suggesting that they were slagging you off. Can you honestly say there's no tension between you and Ed Miliband?
Of course. Of course I can say honestly. It's tittle-tattle gossip and nonsense. I can honestly say that to you. The emails, look, were ridiculous, and actually Ed and I had both been agreeing in the debate which we were having internally at the time, on the other side of the argument from the advisors, if you like. I think that it's rather simplistic to think that was Ed versus Ed. Actually, on that one, two Eds were better than one.
Ed Balls, thank you very much. And to see the full interview with the Shadow Chancellor and to tell us what you think of Labour's new proposals, do visit our website, channel4.com/news.